Hey, my loves, welcome back to the From the Pages series of In Her Own Voice. I am Queen Visionary. Today, we are going to hear a testimony from a gentleman whose redemption story is definitely worth the listen. But before we get into that, let me wish a happy Father's Day to all of the fathers. I hope that you felt loved this week, appreciated, and blessed, and have been filled with joy, peace, and gratefulness. There are some truly amazing fathers roaming the earth and creating this irreplaceable excellence for themselves. So I salute you, my kings. Thank you so much for being in position. Okay, so this testimony is called Cross Current. My name is Zaire Stevens, and for many years, I believed my future had already been decided for me. Not because someone told me it had, but because I saw the statistics. I saw the neighborhoods. I saw the broken families. I saw the young men who came before me and the outcomes that seemed almost inevitable. Today, as a criminal defense attorney, I have spent years studying the factors that influence human behavior. I've represented men whose lives were shaped by poverty, abandonment, addiction, violence, and poor choices. I've studied criminal justice, constitutional law, sociology, psychology, and faith. I've sat across from people society had written off and learned that behind every case file is a story. What fascinates me is how often people focus on what someone did while ignoring what happened to them. That distinction doesn't excuse behavior, but it often explains it. And when I look back at my own life, I see a young boy whose greatest struggle wasn't poverty, crime, or even the streets. It was identity. I grew up as what I call a fatherless child. Now, that statement usually surprises people because my father lived in the same house. He slept under the same roof. He ate at the same table, although not at the same time as me. He walked through the same doorway and same hallway. From the outside, we looked like an actual family. But one lesson life taught me early is that presence and involvement are not the same thing. A man can occupy a space physically while being completely absent emotionally. My father was there, but he wasn't available. He wasn't available to teach me what healthy masculinity looked like. He wasn't available to help me navigate disappointment. He wasn't available to explain why I carried so much anger. He wasn't available to affirm my value. As a boy, I couldn't articulate what I was missing. I only knew something felt incomplete. Today, I understand that children are constantly asking silent questions. Who am I? Do I matter? Am I enough? And when those questions go unanswered at home, many children go searching for answers elsewhere. And that's exactly what I did. For years, I waited for conversations that never came. I waited for guidance that never arrived. I waited for affirmation I desperately needed but never received. I wanted my father to look me in my eyes and tell me I mattered, to tell me I had purpose, to tell me I was capable of becoming something greater than my circumstances. When those words never came, I searched for validation in places that could never truly provide it. At 12 years old, I found the streets, or perhaps the streets found me. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't searching for trouble. I was searching for belonging. The human need for acceptance is one of the strongest forces in the world. Every day in my legal practice, I see people making devastating decisions simply because they wanted to feel connected to something. I was no different. The older guys in the neighborhood had what appeared to be everything I thought a man should have: money, attention, respect, women, influence, people moved when they entered a room. At least that's how it appeared to me at the time. What I didn't understand then was the difference between influence and character. I confused fear for respect. I confused popularity for significance. I confused attention for love. Those men became my examples. In many ways, they became the fathers I never had. And because I desperately needed guidance, I accepted their definition of manhood without questioning it. But the consequences came quickly. I lost my virginity at 13. At the time, I thought it made me a man. Today, I understand how immature that thinking was. Real manhood isn't proven through conquest, it's proven through responsibility. But responsibility was the last thing on my mind. I pursued girls for validation. I used charm and promises to gain affection. I said things I truly didn't understand, made commitments I wasn't prepared to keep. I was a boy trying to imitate what I believed grown men did. Then, at 15 years old, reality arrived. A young woman became pregnant with my child when she was 16. I remember learning I was going to be a father. I remember the fear. I remember the panic. I remember feeling completely unprepared. Years later, after becoming a father and mentoring young men, I realized something profound. Children do not become adults simply because they create children. Age does not create maturity. Responsibility does. I wasn't mature. I wasn't prepared. I wasn't equipped. I was terrified. When my son was born, I held him in my arms and I experienced two emotions simultaneously: love and then fear. Love because he was mine. Fear because I absolutely had no blueprint for becoming the father he deserved. How do you teach what was never taught to you? How do you model something you've never witnessed? How do you lead someone when you're lost yourself? Those questions haunted me. And instead of confronting them, I ran from them. I remained involved in my son's life briefly, but I was still chasing women, still chasing validation, still chasing an image, still pretending to be a man while behaving like a boy. I told his mother I loved her, told her I would marry her. Part of me wanted to believe those words, but wanting something and being prepared for it are not the same thing. Eventually, I abandoned them both when he was just 6 months old. It's one of the greatest regrets of my life because even then, I loved him. I just hadn't learned how to sacrifice for him. At the same time, my relationship with my own mother deteriorated. The woman who had sacrificed for me, prayed for me, believed in me, I pushed her away too. I moved out of her house and in with older friends, friends who reinforced every bad habit and every destructive belief I held. Looking back, I understand that my greatest enemy was never the streets. It wasn't poverty. It wasn't my father. It wasn't society. It was my own inability to take responsibility for my choices. That truth was painful to accept, but it was necessary because accountability is where transformation begins. My mother saw this long before I did. She saw potential underneath the foolishness, purpose underneath the pain, greatness underneath the mistakes. I know now there were nights she cried herself to sleep, nights she prayed for my safety, nights she asked God to intervene because she could no longer reach me. My father had already left her for another woman, and she still remained faithful to God. Still she prayed, still she believed, even when I gave her every reason not to. For years, I chased and obtained temporary things: money, popularity, attention, status. I thought toughness made me important. I thought fear commanded respect. I thought image mattered more than integrity. But I was wrong, completely wrong. Then, at 18 years old, consequences finally caught up with me. One day, the group I associated with was raided by police. I happened to be there. I had drugs in my system. I had drugs on me, and I was arrested. The law has taught me many things over the years. One of them is this: consequences are often the most honest teachers we will ever encounter. I was sentenced and spent 18 months incarcerated. People often ask me, when did my life change? The answer isn't complicated. My life changed when I got tired. Tired of running, tired of excuses, tired of disappointing everyone around me, tired of disappointing myself. A little over a year into my sentence, I sat alone and began asking questions I had spent years avoiding. Was I going to spend my entire life blaming my father, blaming my environment, blaming everyone except the man in the mirror? Or was I finally going to accept responsibility? That moment became the turning point, not because my circumstances changed, but because my mindset did. I started reading, studying, learning, questioning. For the first time in my life, I became hungry for knowledge. Books introduced me to worlds beyond my own. History taught me perspective. Faith taught me humility. Education taught me discipline. The law captured my attention in a way nothing else had ever had. I became fascinated by justice, rights, human behavior, consequences, redemption. I wanted to understand why people made the choices they made. I wanted to understand the systems that shaped communities. Most importantly, I wanted to understand myself. During that season, a team of ministers visited the facility regularly, and I began to connect with one in particular. What began as casual conversations became one of the most important mentorships of my life. He taught me things that no one had ever taught me: how a man carries himself, how a man speaks, how a man serves, how a man leads, how a man honors God, how a man gets on his knees and prays, how a man honors women, honors his word. He taught me things that many sons learned from their fathers. And through him, God began rebuilding parts of me I didn't even realize were broken. When I was released, I made a decision. I was done surviving. I wanted to start living. So I enrolled in college. Walking into a classroom after incarceration was humbling. Being different and a couple years older than many of the other students was humbling. Starting over was humbling. But humility became one of my greatest teachers. Every day I showed up. When I was discouraged, I showed up. When I doubted myself, I showed up. When others doubted me, I showed up. Because success isn't built through motivation, it's built through consistency. Eventually, I earned my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. Then I continued pursuing my legal education. The same determination I once devoted to destruction, I redirected towards building the discipline, building the knowledge, building my character, building a future, building a legacy. Along the way, I reunited with my son. By then, he was 10 years old. One of the most difficult conversations of my life was explaining why I wasn't there, why I missed so much, why he learned to walk without me, why he learned to talk without me, why I wasn't in the stands at his little league football games, why I wasn't present. There were tears, there was pain, there was hard truths and consequences I deserved to face. But there was also grace. His mother showed me tremendous grace and forgave me. My son showed me tremendous grace and forgave me as well. And I promised him something. I promised him that I would never abandon him again. Not emotionally, not physically, not spiritually, not mentally. I would become the father I needed growing up. Not perfect, but intentional. Over time, our relationship healed. His mother and I became great co-parents. My relationship with my mother healed as well. One of God's greatest gifts is restoration. Not the restoration of the circumstance, but the restoration of people. Years later, I encountered an old friend from my street days. He appeared very successful, expensive clothes, luxury vehicle, money. The same image that once captivated me brought me in once again. He invited me to a party and I attended. But shortly after arriving, I realized I was standing in the middle of everything God had delivered me from: drugs, weapons, prostitution, chaos. As I prepared to leave, an altercation erupted. My friend was shot with a stray bullet. I was standing directly beside him, saying my goodbyes to him. To this day, I still see it. The gun was aimed in our direction, and had I been only a few centimeters closer, the bullet that took his life would have just as easily taken mine. I watched the life leave his body immediately. That moment shook me deeply. I mourned his death, but I also recognized something. God had given me a second chance, literally. Standing there, staring at my friend's body, I felt a conviction unlike anything I had ever experienced before. It wasn't an audible voice, but it was unmistakable. God impressed something upon my spirit that night. If you go back to this life again, I will not bring you out of it next time. The message was clear. The mercy I had received was not permission to continue living recklessly. It was an obligation to change. And second chances come with responsibility. I understood that night that redemption requires separation. You cannot consistently revisit the environments that nearly destroyed you and expect a different outcome. I left that life completely. I never looked back. More years passed. I graduated. I built a career, bought a home, established stability, and eventually became a criminal defense attorney. Sometimes I still smile when I say those words: a criminal defense attorney. A young man who once sat in a jail cell now stands in the courtrooms. A young man who once broke the law now studies it, practices it, and uses it to protect the rights of others. Every day I enter a courtroom, I am reminded that people are more than the worst decision they have ever made. Because I know what it feels like to be judged by a chapter instead of the entire book. The public often sees charges. I see human beings. I see stories. I see pain. I see the trauma. I see bad decisions. But I also see potential. That perspective shapes everything I do. I do not excuse criminal behavior. Personal accountability matters. But I also understand that justice without humanity becomes something dangerous. Every week I sit across from men who remind me of myself. Men carrying anger, fear and loneliness, shame and confusion. Men who desperately need someone to tell them the truth, not condemn them, but the truth. I tell them their pain doesn't have to become their identity, that their mistakes don't have to become their future, that where they started doesn't determine where they finish. I tell them that purpose is still possible, healing is still possible, redemption is still possible. More importantly, I tell them that they matter because every person does. Not because society or a courtroom says so, but because God says so. Today, my son is 26 years old. He has found his own purpose in finance and is doing extremely well. He's also engaged to be married. Watching him build a life fills me with a gratitude I struggle to describe. God also blessed me with an incredible wife 10 years ago, a woman who, as a girl, was a part of my childhood and later saw the man I was becoming instead of the boy I used to be. Together, we have a super smart, beautiful 8-year-old daughter who more than likely will follow in her daddy's footsteps, as she is already intrigued with how laws work. Every day, I have the privilege of showing her what a loving father and husband looks like. She'll never experience the abuse of a boy or a man the way I gave it growing up. The cycle ended with me. Today, my mother smiles differently. Yes, I became a lawyer. Yes, I earned degrees. Yes, I achieved professional success. But she smiles because she sees the man I became, the man she prayed for, the man she never stopped believing existed. When everyone else saw a problem, she saw possibility. When everyone saw failure, she saw potential. When everyone else gave up on me, including me, she kept praying. And those prayers carried me farther than I ever could have gone alone. So, if you're listening to my story, let me leave you with this. Your pain is not permanent. Your failures are not final. And the absence of what you needed does not prevent you from becoming what someone else needs. I know because I lived it. To every father hearing this, be present, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Your children do not simply need your provision, they need your presence. And to every person who feels disqualified by their past, your story is not over. You are not confined to your worst decisions. You are not limited by where you began. You are one decision away from changing the direction of your life. I know that because I was once the angry little boy searching for significance. And by God's grace, I became the man I was always meant to be. Thank you for listening to my story. Whew. Listen, y'all. Life has a way of carrying us through rough waters. Sometimes the current is made of our own choices, right? Sometimes it's made of wounds we never asked for, but sometimes it's both. But what I loved about his story is that it wasn't about perfection. It was about courage, the courage to face yourself, to clear the dust and the smoke from the chaos of the past, and make amends, to grow, and to become someone your younger self could be proud of. Zaire's journey is a reminder that healing doesn't erase what happened. It transformed what it symbolized or what it symbolizes. And when we choose growth over bitterness, when we choose responsibility over excuses and love over fear, we create something powerful. We create a future that looks nothing like the pain we've come from. Ah, wow. Great story. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. Remember, your fears don't define you, your doubts don't control you, and your dreams are waiting for you. Until next time, keep speaking in your own voice.